I remember maybe scoring 0 or 1 in a physics quiz in the first semester that immediately brings you down to ground. I have been quite fortunate to have a lot of knocks in my life. It takes 6 meetings
Yes.
before people start looking at you very seriously and either say, hey, this is fantastic, we want to do something with you guys, saying, hey, we can't boil the ocean. Let's have a very specific number of companies that we want to go after. The true benefit of being very grounded and ethical, it drives opportunity your way.
Today we have with us Venkat Vishwanathan, founder, chairman, and visionary behind Latent View Analytics. And Latent View Analytics is, for the audience who may not know, but it's one of the world's largest and fastest growing digital analytics firms. Latent View has helped several Fortune 500 clients, including Microsoft, etc., drive digital transformation by helping them combine digital and traditional data to gain a competitive advantage. Latent View has more than 650 employees, and the firm has managed to remain closely held despite its operation and success size. They are at the cutting edge, or one can say at the bleeding edge in data analytics, and how to make sense out of millions of transactions for actionable insights and accurate decisions. So a lot of leading companies consider them partners. And the interesting part is they have created this practically out of nothing, from an idea to people to a base in India to then cracking global clients, and now having most of the top clients, top leaders in the world being their partners. And also I'm told that Latent View has been one of the top 10 recruiters in various IIMs and has managed to attract and retain top quality talent and make them grow. So Venkat has over 20 years of experience in management, consulting, technology, and global IT services management. He has now transitioned to an advisory role in the organization. Before he founded Latent View Analytics, he was part of a global leadership team for Cognizant Communication Practice, where he was in charge of strategy and business development. There he worked closely with field sales teams in winning key global service provider clients and growing the business to a $20 million milestone. Venkat is an engineer from IIT Madras and an MBA from IIM Calcutta. He was awarded recently in 2017 the Distinguished Alumnus Award of IIT Madras. So Venkat is also an exceptional networker, reaching out to people without feeling awkward, unknown people, and yet connecting with them, connecting people to others to make them grow. So in my view, he's kind of a true go-giver. He has not let the success get into his head. So thank you, Venkat, for joining us.
Thanks, Rohan, for the generous introduction, and thank you for giving this opportunity.
And this show, as I shared with you, is focused on learning through real life stories. So, tell a bit about your personal life journey beyond all these, success and qualifications.
Yeah, I guess as with many of us in our generation, I'm from a middle class family where we were 5 children. I was the youngest of 5 kids. I have 4 sisters ahead of me. And my dad used to work for the government, right? So he was in the Audit General's office. So the first 10 years I spent in Chennai or Madras, where I was born. And then I spent the next 8 years so in Delhi. So I grew up in West Delhi, in Janakpuri. So my formative teenage years were all Delhi. And it was fun. 80s Delhi was a amazing place, a lot greener, a lot less polluted, and a lot of open spaces for us to kind of play and interact and grow up. So yeah, and then so most of our values, thought processes, everything was shaped by what you experienced at that point in time. As with our generation, you had to choose a professional career, almost like a route to salvation, right? So to find a way to start earning better money. Funnily enough, most of us ended up our first salaries were probably the same as where our dads retired at, right? And that's how the generational switch, we were the fortunate generation, gained a lot from all the changes that India went through.
What would you define as, the core soil and root? We always see tree and fruit, but what is the core soil and root in your life? Who's Venkat, behind the whatever I was describing, and how has your inner thoughts and narratives worked for you? So core values and leadership philosophy, how did they get built?
No, I think a lot of that, again, I feel in some way the cohort of people who go through the kind of institutes you and I went through tend to have a lot of things in common. We all come from very humble backgrounds. Of course, when we meet people who are from even more humble backgrounds, you're kind of blown away. I thought I was at the bottom, but there are people who are much further behind who didn't even go to a proper school, right? Or who went to a school with very limited facilities. We at least grew up in a big urban center. A lot of them grew up in small villages, right? So in that sense, I think a philosophy that's been dear for me is not to lose sight of where we are from and try to kind of stay in touch with who we are. I think it has helped with WhatsApp and all of these innovations. Now we are getting back in touch over the last 10 years with a lot of our friends from our childhood. And it's amazing to see the various paths each of us have taken in life. But in many ways, each have their own definition of success. And finally, nothing much differentiates people other than your character and the way you behave and the way you kind of handle people. And all other things are kind of ephemeral in some sense, right? I hope to hear my friends say, hey, you're the same guy we met 25 years back or 30 years back, and nothing has really changed. And even in the way we run our business and the way we think about leadership, I think important we back people. Finally, a lot of this comes down to finding the right people, engaging them, empowering them so that we can win as a team. Very soon you realize that you have limited abilities and you can't be everywhere. And there's only a defined amount of time that you have in front of you. And unless you have a team which has the same values and which believes in the same things that you believe in, we won't get very far. So I think a lot of our time goes in finding those people and making sure we are all aligned.
So let me take you back in the childhood. What would you call as your biggest challenge in childhood?
I wouldn't say I had too many challenges. As I said, I was the youngest of 5 kids. In one version of truth that many people have is I was very spoiled, the only son, all of those things. But then it's also true that also meant there were enough people looking out for me and expecting things from me and in some sense guiding me through the whole process. It took me maybe, I don't think I always had a voice, but maybe it took me a while to find my ground as the youngest to be able to say things which others will listen to. And you're not being I don't think we had that culture in our family of people not listening to you, but still, I had to find my feet maybe. Otherwise, I think I had a very comfortable childhood. The switch to Delhi was certainly a cultural shift, as you can imagine. 10 years in Chennai, and the only Hindi I spoke is how you read one of those Hindi Prachar Sabha books or something, right? So as you can imagine, I land in a playground in Delhi and speak to the kids, and everybody is kind of rolling on the floor. I'm trying to see like, hey, what's wrong with my Hindi? And they say like, hey, you talk like maybe somebody in Doordarshan or something.
Okay.
Not even that. At least they had better Hindi, but mine was very theoretical. But the good news is when you're 10 or 11, you adapt very fast. So maybe it was a month, maybe it was 2 months, and I could then speak just the local lingo in Punjabi-laced Hindi that was common in the 80s Delhi.
So what would be you call as, can you describe one or two events that shaped your personality?
I don't know if it's a single event like that I can kind of attribute things to, but I think some of this is when we go to the universities we went, very quickly you realize there are like when you're in high school, in the kind of high school many of us went to, you don't have to fight very hard to be in the top 3 or 4 kids in the class, right? This is not to demean anyone in my class. All I'm saying is most of us kind of were able to kind of run and maintain the pace. But the moment you turn up in a top university, you find there are people who are far ahead of you. You are humbled very quickly. As also the demands that some of the professors in the university places on you, they expect a lot out of you, right? So I remember maybe scoring 0 or 1 in a physics quiz in the first semester that immediately brings you down to ground. And you think you're a topper type and you turn up there and you're shown where you stand. And I think some of those things help in ensuring we stay grounded. We don't lose sight of where we are from and what is the overall context. It's another matter. You are in the top 0.1 power 10 percentage of people that you're competing with, but it still is a humbling experience, and it does shape your thinking in terms of, hey, there are always better people than you. Don't get too far ahead of you.
So, and if you look back your entire life, where would you say what was the biggest turning point for you?
don't know if you would call it a turning point. I have been quite fortunate to have a lot of knocks in my life. When I say knocks, these are things don't come to you very easily. So that makes sure you're always cautious and you're always giving it your best because it didn't come easy, right? So if you take education, there were points where like we had all these entrance exams you had to clear. So I remember I wrote the rookie entrance maybe about 2 weeks before the IIT entrance, right? Or
Okay.
maybe a month before. I don't remember now what
Mm,
it was in the 90s. I was shocked. I kind of thought I have prepared for the last year and a half or something like this, and I find I was actually at sea and I couldn't figure out. I didn't feel confident when I came out, right? And I could see that lots of others had a very different kind of experience. They felt it was an easy paper and they've done well, right? It helped that I had that shock before I had to give the next exam.
Okay.
And in some sense, bring focus to how you think. And this time I somehow kind of squeaked through, right? The same thing happened maybe the next level where I had to get into the business school. I didn't get through the entrance test the first try, right? And then I knew it's not as easy. You kind of assume everybody from your college gets through, and then you find you cannot get through. And I didn't have any other choices. I had made the choice of only pursuing this path, and I'm not interested in any other path. And in some sense, I was always like that. I'm one of those people who makes a hard choice, just bets everything on that hard choice.
Okay.
So I decided by 11th grade, no medicine. I have no interest in being a doctor. I wouldn't even apply anything in this area, even though you would find a lot of children at that age kind of keep a lot of options open, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, when it came to going abroad and studying and all that, I made the choice. I won't even write GRE. I don't think I'm interested in doing this a couple of more years or 5 more years of engineering and all of that, right? So I made a hard choice and kind of pursued this. So those were certainly pivots where you get a turn and you have to sit back and assess, and you have to make sure you realize how competitive the world is and how you will need to be at your best if at all you want a chance. I wouldn't say it's a turning point, but certainly it's a pivot where you are made to think, and luckily you get the good grades.
So let's say pick from post MBA to now.
Yeah.
What would be one of the biggest failure, setback, or rejection that you faced and then you turned it around?
I think running a company has been a series of those setbacks, right? So as I keep saying, entrepreneurship is all about the high highs and the low lows, right? So the amplitude changes, as in everyone has highs and lows. But once you become an entrepreneur, it's like the jaggedness of the curve or the graph that you get to experience. We have had quite a few setbacks. I think it has taken us the first 3-4 years are very, how do I say, formative. It kind of set the right tone for our company. It made sure that we don't get any easy wins. It made sure that we think very hard in terms of what do we want, what kind of customers we want, what kind of business we want, what kind of people we want on board, all of those things, right? So it took us almost 3.5, 4 years. So in terms of timeline, 2008 and 9 were maybe our third and fourth year, right? Or second and third year.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, the global financial crisis was in full swing. And we wanted to be an international export-oriented business. As you can imagine, when I turn up for a meeting in the US, somewhere in New York or Chicago, people are nice enough. They were meeting us, but they did tell us, hey, I don't even know if I have a job 2 quarters down. The way things are going, companies are folding up, companies are downsizing. So it's good to meet you, but we don't know if there is anything for you right now. But we had to kind of stay steady through all that and make sure we don't lose heart, as also stay frugal in terms of we still had some other customers who were ready to do business in other markets. So why not kind of keep running that while we wait for the right opportunity? As it turned out, in 2010, everything just turned around completely. And after that, there was no looking back, because that was when we won our first big deals in the US. And then we realized the technology sector in the US is going to be a big opportunity for us. And we bet everything on it and grew our business dramatically in the next 10 years.
So I remember, in one of the, interviews, you were talking about, focused on cracking the first deal. And there was some strategy you followed. And if you can briefly explain that, because, doing something big and which was so far not done, and how did you go about and how did you remain focused?
I think what we did realize in those 2 to 3 years, maybe 2008, 9, 10, when we are interacting with customers, is there is anecdotally a certain rhythm to a sales cycle, right? So in terms of meeting people, and we try to put some numbers to the whole aspect of building a relationship, building a trusting business relationship. We realized that it takes 6 meetings before people start looking at you very seriously and either say, hey, this is fantastic, we want to do something with you guys. Or they may even say, look, you've wasted a lot of my time and it's time for us to put a full stop and maybe don't come and bother me one more time, right? But it is our job, what is in our control is to ensure we turn up for those 6 meetings and we keep asking for those 6 meetings. And even today, I truly believe there is no resistance to persistence. You have to persist, you have to keep knocking on that door. It is possible some doors easily open. On an average, it does take 6 meetings before people say, hey, this is relevant and I'm just giving you an opportunity. Let's see how far this goes.
And I remember you were saying that you actually listed these are the 50 clients in through which we want to focus on, and you followed it through for I think quite some time, and then the dam opened.
I think some of those principles we truly believe in. I think focus is very essential. You're small, and even today we are a small company. It makes no sense to say, hey, I want to work with the Fortune 1000. That's like 1,000 companies. That's like if we take the 6 meeting rule, I have to have at least 6,000 meetings. Things start happening. It makes no sense, as in we don't have that kind of bandwidth or capacity. So very early on, and again, part of this is the fortunate training I've had in the companies I worked in before this, where we, in our sales teams, we always had a target list saying, hey, we can't boil the ocean. Let's have a very specific number of companies that we want to go after. And let's list down all the names of those companies. It is possible we don't know precisely who the individuals are. That is okay. Some leeway we give you, but we have to know which companies we are going after. And then we spend all our time in trying to kind of knowing these companies at a level of detail, so that when we turn up and when we get those opportunities, we seem like a credible partner for them. They are happy to see you because you've taken the effort to kind of search them up and you know them, right? And you know their challenges already. I remember there was a period where we had only 5. For every individual salesperson, we said no more than 5 companies, right? And so overall, as a company, maybe we had 15 or 20. There are only 3-4 of us knocking on doors. And it seemed to help. Of course, you need luck to kind of get the break, but it seemed to help that we were not wasting away or taking a scattergun approach.
What is the biggest dilemma you have ever faced, the most difficult decision of your life?
Again, I probably don't do enough looking back and analyzing and trying to kind of find those events. So I'm sorry if I don't give you a simple, here is a single event. There have been different points, decisions that we had to take. I think the first decision, if I take LatentView, the company, the very first decision we had to take was, do we want to focus on India as a market? Do we want to be purely an international business? In the first 2 to 3 years, we really, even though the aspiration was international, we had no clue, right? So first generation entrepreneurs, we had the comfort of a large company prior to this, and that company somehow opened doors, and we had no idea how to get in front of the right prospect. And we are all trying to do this sitting in India, that too, right? So we are not even in the market. It did take us 2 to 3 years, and we had that dilemma in that 2 to 3 year period saying, we are winning business in India. It's not as if India doesn't have opportunity. It's just that the ticket sizes doesn't seem large enough. And we didn't know if the international would be bigger, but we could see that this was not big enough. The clients are demanding, which in itself is not bad, but which also, when paired with very low margins, didn't seem like a great fun experience for us. So we had to make that decision, and we also had to be, how do I say, quite clear about this, that you can't have your legs in 2 boats, right? You have to make the choice, right?
Okay.
And so the first choice we made was we want to go international, right? And we'll keep the Indian business more to keep us afloat till we find that large anchor international customer. And that happened in 2010. So it took us about 4 years since we started. But eventually, after that, we never looked back. We kind of made that choice and we stuck with that choice that we will be export oriented and not focus on it.
So another question for you is, you answered in parts that in at turbulent times, what has kept you anchored?
It is inevitable that there will be events which are not in your control, right? So what we are going through in the last 12 to 18, 12 months at least, is something like that. And this is not the first. We have been through a few of these before, right?
Mm.
It's important then we have a few cornerstones we believe in, right? And we don't lose sight of those and get distracted simply because the environment is kind of pushing us in some direction, right? Some choices we have made is, again, we want to sell to large customers, right? And we want to sell, I call it sell to rich customers. So it's not just large companies, but companies that are in good financial health and can afford to engage us on an ongoing basis. While this is a very simple dictum, you find this does get challenged at different points. People say, no, I have a cousin who's there in this company, which is like 200 people in the US. It's in Silicon Valley. It will grow at some point. Why not we do business, right? So, and we keep telling them, look, that's not the profile of the company we want to do business with, because we'll probably spend the same effort to kind of service this company, but they won't be able to scale the relationship with us beyond a point, right? And so unless there is a very different strategic reason, this is not the profile of companies that we want to go for. So things like that, that's one aspect. But more importantly, I think relationships, that's something which is really important in our business. And that stands the test of time, right? Especially when you support your clients, when they are going through turbulent times, they are struggling. Like the last 12 months, we have had maybe 10% of our clients or 15% of our clients who have really existential questions, right? This is like a large hotel chain or a large airline. Are you going to come back or game over? This is a period where it's very important. They need to see you are with them, and we will do whatever it takes to help you tide through this period, because they picked us when they were healthy and they thought things are rosy in front of them, right? So if one thing has helped us really in the last 10 to 15 years, it's been those relationships and the importance that we place in those relationships and the long-term thinking that we have about those relationships. Like I would say, I've not done this math, but I would be surprised if more than half, if it is not true that more than half our business has come through reference, right? When I say reference, these are people who have done business with us, went away somewhere, they left the client that we are working with, and then they call us maybe a couple of years down the line, inbound, saying, hey, remember me, and like we did some stuff together. I really enjoyed that part. I like the people. I like the way you guys handle this. In this new company, I have some need, and I thought of you guys, right? That happens only because we focused on those relationships. And I think those are elements of what we really care about, and the long-term thinking as well. I've always said, I don't want to be in a position where I'm hiding from someone in an airport or in a party simply because I did something negative with them, right? So I want to be boldly walking in front of them and say, hey, good to see you again, right? And we always have only positive relationships. That's not easy to pull off, right? There will be instances where we have not parted most amicably, but at the same time, we need to have the courage to walk up to them and say, hey, that was then, this is now, and we want to be friends and we want to kind of move on. But if we broadly take that approach that don't do anything that in the long term is not in our interest, you'll find you don't have to really do that too often.
So let me come back to this point of being called LinkedIn before LinkedIn, and so being a networker. So give me a little more thought behind. I've also done a whole lot of networking, so I want to pick your brain on what thought you had behind it. Were you like that from childhood only? And how do you go about it that, in your busy time, you still do this like a passion of reaching out to people and being an admin to a whole lot of college groups? So give me a little, story behind.
No, I think I've always had this, and probably I inherited this from my dad, and to some extent even my mom, that they had their networks and they used to work assiduously in keeping in touch with people. So as children, we were taken to meet some distant friend of theirs, or they went to school with someone. And it kind of leaves an imprint in terms of this is how you bring happiness to yourself, right? So it's not just being an isolated sole animal and kind of focusing on what is in front of you, but go out and meet people and build bonds, right? And I must say, I was like this even before email came on, right?
Mhm.
And then I'm traveling before mid 90s, right? So I'm just drawing a line. When we all graduated is probably when email coming in,
Yeah,
95,
94 or
97.
something. Mhm.
Even before that, I was like this. When I go from city to city, as I said, my parents were in Delhi while I was studying in Chennai, and so I used to travel back and forth. So the moment I come back to Delhi, I make it a point to go catch up with all my high school friends and track them down and go to their homes and invite them over and all of that. And similarly, when I'm in Chennai, I go around meeting people, getting introductions from friends, meeting new friends, and so on, right? So I think I'm lucky I had that DNA already. Even when I was not running a company, when I was working for the first 10 years of my career, I used to make it a point. Each city I visit on a business trip, I try to kind of reach out to whom do I already know and how do I meet more people through them, right?
Mhm.
And then once I meet those people, I stay in touch via email or whatever.
Yeah,
So I
so
think,
one question is that, meeting people versus the desire to meet new people. That is where the shift is, I think. So
yeah.
where did that come from and how that has helped you?
No, I guess again, we had this conversation recently. I was asked to do some of the internal training for our own people around networking, right? I was sharing this with them. I think it's a skill that we all can develop. It's not as if
Exactly.
it is a you're born with or not born with, right? So this is just like anything else in life. You just methodically go about thinking about what kind of people do I want to meet and what
Mm.
will help me in my career in what I'm trying to do, right? And once you have clarity in terms of here is what I'm trying to do, then you will figure out a way to go out and meet people, and you will figure out a way where all can you potentially volunteer your time, and you would find that there are enough takers for your knowledge and your skill when you start volunteering time. Like even today, I spent time with the next building to ours is the IIT Madras Research Park, right?
Okay.
Now, this is a setup where they have incubated as many as 80 to 100 companies over the last 10 years, and they have an incubation cell, and the incubation cell needs some alumni to come back and mentor people. When I say mentor, it's not as if we know a lot of things that they don't know. In fact, most times for the ideas that they bring, I have zero context of how to build a detector for tuberculosis, which
Mm-hmm.
handles drug resistant TB or something, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't know anything about the subject, right? But I would know some very basic things around how do you define your market, right? Have you thought
Yeah.
about the economics of this market? And can
Mm-hmm.
you kind of explain to me why there is a market for this?
Mm-hmm.
And these are things which may not come very easily to that inventor, but in some sense, you have that ability to kind of bring, right? So
Mm-hmm.
volunteering your time, I find is a very easy way for strangers to meet you. When you start meeting those strangers, invariably you will encounter a few people that you want to then graduate them to you being a personal friend, and then they
Mm-hmm.
become your friend, and that's how things go on from there.
And so what I heard actually that you don't find it awkward meeting new people, meeting strangers. So what is the thought which goes behind that? Otherwise there are a whole lot of people who will not walk up to someone who they don't know. So my sense is that you will walk up to anyone anywhere if it made sense to you. And so from where does that come? What goes on in your head when you do so?
I don't know if I'm a Superman, so I can tell you I feel as awkward when I have to meet some people that I don't already know. But
Yeah.
having said that, I think the desire or the drive to step out of my comfort zone
Mm-hmm.
and go meet people, I have worked on it, right? Just like any other skill that we all work on, right? You want to
Okay.
be good at public speaking, or you want to be good at whatever certain other aspect. It's just a matter of practice, right? So you put in the number of hours, and then automatically you're improving with time. You may not be the best in the field, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly you will improve with time. You're realizing your potential, right? So which is most times the biggest battle for us, right? So even in this, it's the same thing, right? Where and I think in some sense, starting a company has been forces you not to be in your comfort zone, because you can very quickly sink if you don't have the opportunities for the business.
True.
And so it made things a lot easier. But as I did say, I was doing this even earlier. I found this is an area that I enjoy, right? Like some people say they really enjoy talking to people. Some people say they would be more happy looking at a screen and working on a tough math problem, but they don't want to talk to people, right? You need to pick your strength and play to that strength. I found my strength was I could talk to people, and lots of times I didn't have that inhibition in having that initial conversation. But I would have my share of rebuffs as well. It's not as if everybody talks to me very happily. I just take it in my stride and move on.
So, what is then any activity or hobby, anything unusual which you love?
I don't know if it's unusual, but I'm a bit of a geek and a nut for numbers, right?
Okay.
So I don't know if you have heard of this phrase called the quantified self. So there is a movement in, I guess, primarily in the US, but all over the world. These are people who are putting a number to everything, right? How many minutes did I sleep last night, right? What is the depth of my deep sleep versus REM sleep versus whatever light sleep, right?
Okay.
And how does it trend over time? How is it correlated to my heart rate, right? So stuff like that. I've always been fascinated by these things. Luckily for me, I have a spouse who is the exact opposite, who feels I'm completely out of control in trying to have too many devices. So she ensures I'm grounded and I can't buy every device that is available out there. But aside of that, I have explored a lot. Like one device that I have, sadly, I kind of used it so much, it's now gone defunct. I have to buy a new device, is essentially trying to measure the breathing that you're doing. And from that, it's trying to interpret your state of mind. Putting a number to mindfulness. Say you should be mindful. Yeah, this can tell you what state of mind were you when you were in that meeting. And it can figure that out by essentially the diaphragm is vibrating at a certain way, and it is picking up all those segments, and it has a proprietary algorithm to translate all of that into numbers, which you then use to figure out, was I stressed then or was I calm, and what periods of stress do I have in a typical day, and can I put a number to it and all that. So yeah, one other thing I've done is I was probably among the early adopters of something called 23andMe, right? This is like maybe 7-8 years back. In one of my trips to the US, I got myself this DNA test kit, and I gave a spit sample and I sent it off to a lab in California. And 2 months later, they sent me my Janam Patri, right? So they say, okay, of course, all of us started in Africa, but it can also say that your maternal line, 25,000 years back, they were actually nomads in probably Eastern Europe somewhere. So I keep ribbing my mom saying, you're not Indian, you're a gypsy from Romania. My dad's line, it seems to show that even 35,000 years back, they've always been in the eastern coast of India, right? So somewhere between Kashi and Chennai is where all of them have been. So yeah, I find all these very fascinating, and I enjoy doing all of them.
So, what would you be looking forward in life now? So, you've taken a little step back from the hardcore operational or frontline role running the firm. And so, what are you looking forward in life now?
Yeah, before I answer that, I should clarify why I have done that stepping away. I find in business as well as in public life, a lot of people just hold on to power forever, right? So we have seen 40-year-old prime ministers. We have also seen almost 80-year-old prime ministers, right? And so we all keep saying like, hey, why can't we see younger people at the top? Why can't we see other people kind of getting this opportunity? And in some sense, for me, it was flipped in a different way, where I always believe there is a certain limited skill set that I have, and I should push myself to the extent that I can contribute with that skill set. And if I feel I've kind of reached the limit of how much more I can contribute, I should make way for other people to kind of step in and put in their inputs as well. And that's probably the thought process. But that is not to say I'm not engaged in any way with the company, or this is not my top priority every morning when I wake up saying, what are we doing with this business and how far can we take it? That is still the case, right?
Yeah.
But operationally, yes, I'm not doing every sales review. I'm not meeting every new hire as they come in. I'm not doing every sales call with customers and all that. And I feel that is in the overall health of the business to be taking that approach, right? Where we distance ownership from actually running the business, right?
True.
But to go back to your question, when I look ahead in life, I must say I'm so caught up in what is in front of me today. I don't spend a lot of time thinking 10 years out. But if I take the next 3 to 5 years, I think it is very important as our children kind of develop and grow up. We now have two teenagers at home. One boy is already past 18. I think it is our responsibility to kind of ensure they get the best starts in life. And by best start, I only mean a good education and a good set of values that you can share with them, and the amount of time that you can provide them. Right? I make it very clear: any money you want is going to be made by you. I'm not going to help you beyond giving you your education. And hopefully you will find your feet, and you'll find what you want in life, and you will figure out what choices you want. So don't look at us from a monetary perspective. I'm not going to help you much. But I think it's a very important facet of our lives, right? So how we contribute to the next generation, just as our previous generation did in us, invested in us, right? So that's an important part of the next 5 years. The other part is company, of course, has its ups and plateaus that we have hit at different points in time. So we need to find the next wave of growth. So what is different from growing from, say, 100 people to 500 people to going from 500 people to 2,000 people? And is it even desirable to go beyond 2,000 people? What does it change the company into if you become a very large, humongous kind of organization? So those are issues that occupy a lot of my thinking. I have still not found a public cause or a give back to society kind of thought process that some of my friends and even my spouse has. And I'm not saying I don't care. It's more a case of I have not hit upon anything which is so passionate and burning for me that this has to get a lot of my attention. I have not got there, but maybe there is something ahead of me. I want to keep my mind open and saying, just wait it out and it'll surface in front of you.
So what advice would you like to give to a smart driven leader or a leader in making?
I don't know if I'm the right person to be giving advice to them, but let me share what has worked for me and what I truly believe in and what I think it is in their interest to be doing. I think it's very important that people cultivate a long-term orientation, right?
Okay.
And not get distracted by all kinds of numbers that invariably will get thrown at you, and whatever the fad of the season, and the kind of ideas that people expect you to see. As in, I can't list down the number of times I was asked about my exit strategy when the company was 3 years old. Here I had not even found my product market fit, so to say, and we are still trying to get on our feet. And every where I turn, people ask me, "What's your exit strategy?" And I'm saying, like, "Hey, I've not even thought about it." And I still don't have a answer to that question 15 years out, right? Saying, "Am I thinking about what is my exit strategy?" Right? So I think it is important people operate as if your entity will be there forever. It's important people understand the true benefit of being very grounded and ethical. It drives opportunity your way, right? As I said, a lot of the references we get, it's not because we kind of did the kind of work that really blew their mind in terms of our capability set. It's just the way we handle them. It's just the way we partnered them. It's just the way we approach the way we do business with them, and when we had to ask for what is due to us, we were quite fearless, and we walked up to them and say, "Hey, this is the way we have done things. I'm not trying to charge you extra, but this does mean you have to pay for this. You're not getting this for free," right?
True.
At the same time, they will also have situations where they are really in desperate need of help, and we don't talk any commercials. And we said, "Let's first solve the problem because that's important for you, and we will come to the commercials later." And they remember that, right? So I think it is important you approach a lot of your business dealings as lifelong friendships and relationships. You don't want to kind of hide from these people in any social context. And then you will find you have got actually a whole lot of advocates helping you. And at different points, it could be a business help. Some other point, they just give you time on their calendar for you to talk to them. And it's a very lonely journey being an entrepreneur and overcoming hurdles. And it's important you have the network of people that you can kind of go back to at any point and draw on their strength when you're not feeling strong enough. And those are things which I feel people should give as much attention as they do to the financials of their business and how do I find an exit strategy and all of those things. If that is meaningful for your business, certainly you should do. Like fundraising, a lot of people ask me, and I'm saying, look, maybe our business didn't need it, but I can think of 10 other businesses where if you don't have the capital, you're not going anyway, right? Because it's a very capital intensive business. And in that case, knowing how to raise money and knowing how to raise money from the right way is a very important skill, right? And you need to kind of build that skill. So understanding the business context, building the right relationships, staying the course. Are you still the same person at 40 as you are at 30, as you are at 20? Maybe a better version in your own eyes, but hopefully not a monster that you can't recognize saying, this is not the person I was at 20.
So I think this whole conversation has been extremely useful and inspiring, and staying grounded as well as staying connected. So I think grounded is actually deeper roots, and connected is actually connecting those roots to all other roots of the jungle. That will allow you to be a really blossoming tree. So thank you very much for all your insights.
Sure. Thank you, Rohan. Thanks so much for the opportunity. It was great talking to you.